So you may wonder why I'm talking about social processes and cognitive processes in a lecture on personality. Aren't those different fields? Well, it turns out our personality is also a function of how we think about the world and how we interact with other people. And I'm going to tell you about 3 concepts in social cognition that influence personality. And these are self-efficacy, locus of control, and learned helplessness. Now, self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to do some task. So, for example, I have high self-efficacy in lecturing, but I'm a little dyslexic, so I have low self-efficacy when it comes to reading. So, high self-efficacy is the sense that, I've got this, I can do this. Don't worry, it's under control. And people who experience high self-efficacy are more likely to continue working on a task if they fail, right? So they keep going. So because they're more likely to keep going, people with high self-efficacy are also more likely to succeed. Not because they fail, but because they keep going after they fail. On the other hand, people with low self-efficacy for a particular task, they tend not to be successful because either they won't even attempt the task, or when they attempt the task and fail at it, they give up. Okay? So 2 students with equal intelligence or equal mathematical ability can have very different experiences in a math class depending on whether they have high or low self-efficacy for math. Math can be challenging. Imagine a professor passes out a particularly challenging homework assignment. The student with high self-efficacy will say, I know math, I can do this, and they keep trying until they get it right. The person with low self-efficacy tries, gets stuck just like everybody else gets stuck in class, but they interpret their stuckness as a reflection of their ability, and they give up. What increases self-efficacy? Well, if you've been successful in the past at something, then you're more likely to have high self-efficacy. If you encourage yourself or other people encourage you, you can do this. I know you've got this. That helps with efficacy. And also having a role model to look up to. And a great example of this is how long it takes top athletes to run the mile. It took a very long time before anybody could run a 4-minute mile. That is, run a complete mile in 4 minutes or less. In fact, for a long time, people thought it was impossible that humans could run a 4-minute mile. But then someone finally did it, and once he did it, all sorts of people started running the 4-minute mile. Once you see that something is possible to do, it opens up doors. It's incredible. Now, by the way, the record for the mile is a lot less than 4 minutes. It's 3 minutes and 43 seconds. Amazing. Okay, that was self-efficacy. A related concept is locus of control. And I am giving this lecture the day after a national election, and it sort of feels like a really good time to talk about locus of control. People in the US were excited that in this most recent presidential election, a record number of Americans who were registered to vote actually voted. What was that record number? 2/3. A third of Americans didn't even vote. So why is it that people don't vote? What's going on? Well, some people believe that things happen to them entirely as a result of outside forces over which they have no control. So, for example, they might think if they were fired from work, it had nothing to do with them. It was their awful boss or something else. People with an external locus of control, they essentially take their own power over their life and they give it away. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter if I vote. Who cares what I think? I've got a drawing here of a puppet. And that's essentially what external locus of control is, that someone else controls you. You are just a passive victim. People who have an external locus of control are more likely to be depressed. They're more likely to be anxious. They're not happy folks, right? They think that they have no control over their place in the world. And of course, there are some things we have no control over. We're in Southern California. We have no control over earthquakes. But we do have control over whether we earthquake-proof our houses so that if the earthquake isn't too big, there won't be as much damage. But people with an external locus of control would say there's nothing they can do. Internal locus of control, on the other hand, is your belief that you determine your own destiny. That if you work hard enough, you will make a success of yourself. Internal locus of control is a very good predictor of grades. People who have low grades, low GPAs, often they have an external locus of control. Oh, I failed the exam because the professor's mean. Not, I failed that exam because I didn't study hard enough. See that difference? And if you say the responsibility and the power starts and stops here, then you're going to work harder if you fail. Nelson Mandela famously said, "I am the master of my fate and the captain of my destiny." And this is a man who spent decades in a horrible prison. External locus of control is related to the final concept I want to talk to you about, which is learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the belief that everything is beyond your control and it doesn't matter what you do, stuff just happens to you. You don't make things happen to you. So what do I mean by that? Well, imagine some awful thing happened to you. Let me see, you're in a terrible car accident and you perceive that there was absolutely nothing you could have done to avoid the car accident. As a result of that, you might feel a generalized sense of helplessness. In other words, you might learn that your behavior has no effect on the world. So many of the people who do not vote in the U.S. have learned helplessness. They no longer believe that their actions have any impact on the world. They've essentially given up. Here's a picture of a horse that's being held in place by a plastic chair that probably weighs less than half a pound. The horse could easily knock that chair over, but they just stand there, or this horse just stands there because it believes it's helpless, that it has no control. Sometimes the chains that prevent us from being free are not physical chains, they're mental chains, they're psychological chains. They're related to learned helplessness. And I'm going to tell you about a kind of gruesome study, but it's an important study. It was conducted a long time ago by Marty Seligman, who is now one of the founding people of positive psychology. You can see he started out here studying anything but happiness. Here's the study. In a lab, a box was created with two segments that you can see here. On one segment, the floor was electrified, so if you were standing on it, it would give you a little shock, an unpleasant shock, but not one that would damage you. The other side of the box was safe. No shocks were ever delivered in that side of the box. So if you have a dog and you put them in the box and the floor of that box gives them a little shock, what is the dog going to do? Immediately jump to the other side of the box, right, to the safe area. It's like, oh, it's shocking over here. I don't want to be here. Let me go over there and see if it's better. It is. So dogs in this condition almost always escape. And if they're given future opportunities to escape, they'll escape, right? But these are dogs that have control. They can escape. What happens if you create the same situation, but the dog can't escape it? So this is what Seligman did. Same study, but in this case, the dog has a leash that's attached to the side of the box. There's nothing that dog can do to escape the electrified floor. The dog just has to take it. Then later, you put that dog in another box and you see whether that dog will escape a shock in that other box. And in this second box, the dog is not attached to a wall. The dog is completely free. Will the dog continue to sit there and take the shock, take the abuse, like it had to do when it couldn't escape? Now that it can escape, will it suffer from the shock or will it escape from the shock? Well, here's the result. Dogs who have experienced repeatedly a box in which they could not escape from a shock, they give up. They have learned that they are helpless, not just in the setting where they actually were helpless, but in all settings. That is learned helplessness. When past situations cause you to give up now. So learned helplessness is not an issue of being incompetent, of being unable to do something. You know how to do something. The dog knows how to jump away from the shock. But it's a problem of control. You don't think that you control the world. You have so much external locus of control that you feel like literally you're a puppet and there's nothing you can do. We see learned helplessness, unfortunately, all of the time. People who are in abusive relationships often do not leave those relationships. Battered men, battered women, battered children come to learn that they cannot escape from their abuser, and so they stay even though in the future they could escape. And then you can see them struggle so much trying to explain why they stayed with the abuser when they could have left. But it's exactly the same experience that Marty Seligman's dogs went through. Students will give up if they've had repeated failures, academic failures in the past. They will conclude that success in school is not something that they have under their control, and they will give up. To the extent that we have rotten politicians in this country, it's a function of people not voting because they've given up. They feel like, I guess, what's happened to them in life is the best that they'll get, and they should just be happy with what it is, and their vote doesn't matter. Finally, learned helplessness is strongly associated with depression. Depressed people give very pessimistic interpretations to what happens to them, and the interpretations or explanations are biased in a way that maintains their sense of learned helplessness. So it turns out depressed people, when something bad happens to them, they attribute that bad event to themselves. I failed the test because I'm no good at math. But if something positive happens, say I did well on the test, people who are depressed or have learned helplessness attribute positive outcomes to external events. They'll say, oh, I did well on the test, but it was an easy test. So you see how that bias just robs people of any sense of self-worth and sense of an internal focus of control. And these pessimistic explanations that depressed people use, they tend to be global and stable. By global, it's I'm bad at math in general, not that I'm just bad at math today or bad in a particular kind of class, a particular kind of math. I have no ability in math whatsoever. So global and stable. Very depressing. Okay, come back and we'll talk about the big 5 personality traits.